Hey everybody, Tony Cottaspati here from Great Vocal Majority, and I wanted to talk a few minutes about Obama's appearance on Jimmy Kimmel after these police officers were shot in Ferguson. And I want to make some comments about some of the things that Obama said. I also want to talk a little bit about, right now, about why Obama goes on these shows. And I want to point out why he does it at the moment in the short clip of this interview that I'm going to show you here, because there's a critical point that if he were being interviewed, it wouldn't go the same way. So I'll be interrupting this as Obama begins to say his things to interject my comments.
Last night, very late last night for you in Washington, D.C., in Ferguson, two police officers were shot, and thank goodness
Thankfully, they're okay.
They're at home now and they're out of the hospital. And especially, you gave a beautiful speech in Selma last Saturday talking about these very subjects, about civil rights, the past, the present, the future of civil rights. Does that make it especially painful for you when something like this happens?
Obviously, we don't yet know what happened.
Now, Obama claims that we don't know what happened, but we do know what happened. We know that someone from the crowd of protesters shot two policemen. That's what we know. We know two policemen were shot, one in the face and one through the shoulder. We know that both officers survived the wounds, and we know that they were shot during the protest. There's really very little we don't know. We just don't know the identity of the shooter. It's obvious that he was shooting at the policeman. I don't think that can be disputed. So what Obama was referring to here when he says we don't know what happened seems to me to be needless obfuscation.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the officers and their families, and thankfully, as you said, they're going to be okay.
Now, it kind of irked me when I saw him say this, because he seems to be checking a box. Now, I know some people who are Obama supporters are going to say, oh, you're just picking on the guy. But he doesn't seem really upset that policemen have been shot. I mean, think of it the other way around. Imagine if the police shot two protesters, one through the shoulder and one in the face. Do you think that would be the way he's reacting to it? He would react to that? Don't you think he would be angry, and justifiably angry? I mean, don't you think he should be justifiably angry that the police got shot? But he doesn't seem to be. He just seems to be kind of matter of fact, and hey, a couple cops got shot, and we're sorry that happened, and we hope they're okay. That's what he said. That's almost how he's saying it.
What was beautiful about Selma...
And now he's going to change the subject. He's going to try to draw it in, of course, because he can't completely divorce himself from talking about Ferguson. But now he's trying to draw in Selma because he's uncomfortable talking about the cops that just got shot. He's got to get off that topic. He doesn't want to talk about them. So now he wants to talk about Selma because Selma has to do with the historic incident of the civil rights movement and street protests and that kind of thing. And he's going to try to draw the street protests of Selma into the street protests of Ferguson. And they're two completely different things. But listen to this.
Was reminding ourselves that real social change in this country so often has happened because ordinary people are willing in a nonviolent fashion to make their voices heard. And I think that what had been happening in Ferguson was oppressive and objectionable.
Now, he says what was happening in Ferguson was oppressive and objectionable. It's unclear what he's referring to. Is he referring to this Department of Justice report that says that the police stopped black automobile drivers for traffic violations in a disparate way compared to to the population of black people? Or is he referring to the Michael Brown shooting? Because that's really what the protests were about. The protests were never about traffic stops, but he's trying to put all of that together. He's conflating everything into one thing, and it wasn't that at all. The people who protested and rioted and pillaged and burned down the place were doing that because of what they thought was an injustice toward Michael Brown. It had nothing to do with traffic stops. We'll continue.
And was worthy of protest.
Worthy of protest. So what is he really saying was worthy of protest? Again, going back to what I said a moment ago.
But there was no excuse for criminal acts. And whoever fired those shots shouldn't detract from the issue.
This is where I really kind of lost it. The people who shot the cop, or excuse me, who shot the cops, shouldn't detract from the issue. What does that mean? What that means is the issue is not cops getting shot. We don't really think the issue is policemen getting shot. Do you realize that in the last 2 weeks, 7 police officers have been killed in the line of duty? I believe I heard earlier today that all of them were black. Now, how come you don't know about that? How come he's not telling us about that? Now, I give him a break. It's on Jimmy Kimmel a couple of nights ago. But you haven't heard about it on the news, have you? You haven't heard about it from the White House, have you? This is the problem I have with Obama. He goes back to form. He's a street organizer. He's an agitator. He's a softer version of Al Sharpton. And what he's doing is what he knows.
They're criminals. They need to be arrested. And then what we need to do is to make sure that like-minded, good-spirited people on both sides, law enforcement who have a terrifically tough job, and people who understandably don't want to be stopped and harassed just because of their race, that
people who get stopped because of their race. Now, that is something that really needs to be discussed, because are people being stopped because of their race, or are people perceiving they're being stopped because of their race? I think that the evidence indicates it's more likely that people are being stopped just by perception that it's because of race. There have been studies done in a number of different states. And some of those studies have what they've done is they've videotaped people that are driving along highways who are speeding. And they noted the racial makeup of the people who were doing the speeding. And what they learned was, and I think this was done in Maryland and a number of other states, but the one I heard was specifically Maryland. What they discovered in Maryland was that the number of people that were speeding, about 40% of the time those people were black. And guess what the percentage of people who got ticketed for speeding was in terms of race? It was about 40% for blacks. So in other words, people aren't being targeted. People are not being targeted because of race by the cops for traffic stops. In that particular study, it was conclusive. In Maryland, people who got stopped for speeding, 40% of the time were black, and 40% of the speeders were black. So it makes sense. It's not a disparate impact. I mean, I don't know what the population percentage of black people is in Maryland. Let's say it's 25%. If it's 25% and 40% get stopped, Eric Holder would tell you that that's a sign of racism. That's disparate impact. But it clearly is not, because what happened was they did the traffic study that showed people who speed are 40% of the time black. But here is Obama trying to validate a perception that is not true.
We're able to work together to try to come up with some good answers. And I think I put together a task force after the original Ferguson event had taken place that had police officers, police chiefs, and some of the organizers of protests both in Ferguson and in New York, young people.
This is Street Organizer 101. This is Obama doing what he does. Now, first of all, having a task force is nonsense. When a politician pulls together a task force, generally speaking, nothing occurs, nothing comes out of it. You know why? Because politicians are always working on whatever is in front of them at the moment. And once he puts a task force in place, it's not in front of him anymore. So unless something in the news brings it in front of him again, the task force work is meaningless. It's just all for show. It's a bunch of bull. None of it is going to make any difference.
And they came up with some terrific recommendations and found that there's a lot of common ground.
And nothing will happen because of it. I guarantee you, in 2 years, when this man leaves office, people will still be complaining that the cops are stopping them because they're black.
And what we have to make sure of is that the folks who disregard and disrespect the other side, people who resort to violence, that they're marginalized. And
they set us all back. They do, yeah.
They do. And
anyway, this is what I wanted to show you about somebody like Jimmy Kimmel being the interviewer. Perfectly decent guy. But the reason why Jimmy Kimmel fails in this interview is because he doesn't challenge Obama on anything. He doesn't say to Obama anything that I've pointed out here. He doesn't stop him and say, you know, Mr. President, aren't you kind of conflating the whole purpose of the protest versus what the traffic stops and the violations? I mean, how did the people being stopped for traffic violations lead to the kind of frustration that resulted in businesses being burned down and riots? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But, you know, you're never going to get that on an entertainment program, and that is why Obama goes to these programs. One reason. The other reason is he's appealing to voters who don't really pay attention. So that's another reason why he goes. He's not dealing with a news-savvy audience that's watching news channels like CNN or Fox News or any of the others. He's not doing that. He's going on networks where people generally don't pay attention, like Obama because of his personality, and don't really think that he's doing, they don't understand, they don't know any of the details of what he's doing. Anyway, that's it for this particular video. I just wanted you to get a look at this because this, to me, is just an unbelievable kind of example of how Obama really is just a piece of work.